Hello guys, welcome to another Galactic Starveyors Takeout Church. So this month we're looking at the stars and the things in the sky and seeing what they have to tell us about God. So this week we're going to talk about some comets. So there are several hundred comets that spend most of their lives flying among the planets in the solar system. And these comets leave a trail of gas and dust behind them. Now the trailing dust becomes meteors, and as they crash into the Earth's thin atmosphere, the dust starts to burn up. And when they're going in, they light up, and that's what we see as shooting stars. Now, if they don't burn up all the way and they go all the way to the Earth and crash, they become these meteorites, and when they crash, they leave a giant crater. So these comets kind of remind me a little bit of sin. So it's like the comet dust just didn't stay where it's supposed to in the solar system, and I'm sure we've all done some things that we're not supposed to do either. I'm sure you can think of something in your mind. But it gets worse and worse and worse, just like as it comes and becomes a meteorite and crashes. So maybe you did something wrong and then you lied to cover it up, and then you maybe had to tell another lie, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden you have this giant crater-like problem, just like the dust that became the meteorite. So last week we learned that God created the entire universe, and it was awesome. He created everything perfectly, like our solar system, and also like Adam and Eve. And they had a beautiful life in the garden, and they only had one rule that they had to follow, and they had to decide whether or not they were going to follow this one simple rule about a tree that was in the middle of the garden. The garden had lots of trees with good fruit in them, but from one tree they weren't supposed to eat. And so this is where our story starts today.
Just one tree?
In the whole garden, just one tree they couldn't touch?
How hard could that be?
Well, it got harder when someone else showed up in the garden.
Who showed up? Santa Claus? Elvis?
Sure, why not? Santa Claus and Elvis.
Chester!
Sorry, no. It was a serpent.
You mean like a snake?
Right, like a snake.
But this wasn't an ordinary snake. This snake was evil. He told Eve that God was wrong, that eating from that special tree would make them as wise as God himself.
Now Adam and Eve had a choice to make. Would they trust God, or would they trust the snake?
Don't trust the snake! Don't trust the snake! I've got a bad feeling about him.
This is where that free will comes into play. God let Adam and Eve choose who to trust. They chose the snake.
Who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is a choice we've gotta wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife. God gave Adam and Eve a choice. Trust him or trust the voices they heard around him. They chose poorly. By turning away from God, they said they didn't believe him. They were going to go their own way. And sin entered the world.
What's sin?
Sin is when we ignore God, when we go our own way, when we put ourselves first in front of our friends and neighbors and in front of God. When we say to God, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do it my way. Sin entering the world changed everything.
Why?
Because of who God is. God is so pure, sin cannot be near him. Now that serpent knew that. He was trying to hurt God, and he knew if he could get Adam and Eve to sin, then they couldn't be close to God. God's most beloved creatures would have to live their lives apart from him.
Couldn't God just change the rules so they could be with him again? He can do anything, right?
Yes, God can do anything. Anything except change his own nature. He can't change who he is. If God changed who he was, he wouldn't be God anymore. So even though it made God very, very sad, Adam and Eve had to leave the garden and live new lives in a wild, mean world. Now they're a long, long way from paradise. Yes, they're a long, long way from home. And now the world they're in ain't very nice because they're living on their own. So once again we ask the question, who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is a choice we've got to wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife.
This isn't a very happy story.
Nope, and unfortunately, the rest of primeval history only gets worse. Sin has a way of spreading, so much so that one of Adam and Eve's sons turned on his brother and killed him.
Oh no.
Then there were more and more people and more sin until God's creation was drowning in sin. God decided the only way to keep his creation from drowning in sin was to drown the sin. So he flooded the whole world.
Oh, I know this story.
Yep, all that sin was washed away. Unfortunately, so was most of his creation. But he chose one family, led by one man, to start over.
Noah.
That's right. Noah had tried to avoid sin all his life so he could be closer to God. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good man who listened for God's voice. That's why God chose him to start things over. Him and a bunch of animals, of course.
Who came in by twosies.
Except for the ones they used for food. They came in by seventieth. You see, Noah trusted God and listened to God, and God used his family to start over again, to give his creation a second chance.
Is that the end of primeval history?
Unfortunately, no. After the flood, Noah's family was still living in a broken world full of temptation to do your own thing. They were a long, long way from paradise. They were a long, long way from home. And some of Noah's kids were not so nice as they were living on their own. They wondered, who should we trust? Who should we listen to? How are we gonna live our lives? This is choice we've gotta wrestle through. All the girls and boys and men and wives. So Noah's kids had kids, and they had kids, and so on and so on, and they got successful and started building towns and cities and getting proud of themselves. This, of course, is sin. They thought they were so great they decided to build a tower to touch the sky so they could be as tall as God.
That's a crazy idea.
Yep, leave folks alone long enough and they'll come up with all sorts of crazy ideas, like ostrich racing.
Did God have to flood the world again?
No, he promised after the first flood that he would never do that again. That's what the rainbow was about.
Oh yeah, I remember.
But he had to do something because their sinful pride was out of control. So he mixed up their language.
What?
He made it so they couldn't understand each other. He scrambled their talking. If they couldn't understand each other, they couldn't work together to build that big, prideful tower. So they all gave up and wandered off on their own. And God knew it was time for his real rescue plan. A plan that could take the sin away from his children once and for all and set the world right so we could all live with him once more.
Ooh, tell me that story.
I can't. We've come to the end of primeval history, the first 11 chapters of Genesis that set up the rest of the Bible and all of life. But I hope you've learned from these stories a great truth that we'll see over and over again. Things go well when we listen to God, and very badly when we don't. And that leaves us with one little question. Who do you trust? Who do you listen to? How are you gonna live your life? This is choice we've gotta wrestle through. Every girl and boy and man and wife. Every girl and boy and man and wife. Yeehaw!
When Adam and Eve sinned by eating the fruit that they weren't supposed to, the consequences were huge, even bigger than a giant meteorite hitting the earth. Now, in ancient times, people didn't really understand what was going on when they would see things like shooting stars and meteorites hitting the earth. So they would make up some stories to try to figure out what was going on. So, like, maybe those meteorites were gifts from angels, or maybe they were the gods displaying their anger. Now, of course, we know that this isn't the case. It's almost like it's the complete opposite. So instead of it being that God is displaying his anger, we can look at it and remember that those shooting stars, we made a mess of things, but God came up with a stellar plan to fix it. So instead of being angry, he decided to fix everything. And we're going to talk more about that next week. But this week, to help us remember that God has made a stellar plan for our relationship with Him, you need to go into your bags. If you don't already have a bag like this, you can come see me after church, or you can come to the office during business hours and then you can get one of them from me. So in your bag, you're going to find some pipe cleaners, and you're also going to find a pencil. So the word stellar is kind of like, oh, it means like awesome, but it also has to do with stars. And when we look at the shooting stars, we can remember about the big problem they can make, but that God has decided that He's going to fix anyway. So with your pipe cleaners, I want you to make a little star shape. So one thing, if you have it at home, would be quite nice is if you had like a cookie cutter, you could put it all the way around it to help make your star shape. But you're going to start making one, and then with the second piece, then you can kind of finish up your star, because mine didn't quite go all the way. And then what you can do is you can use the rest of that pipe cleaner and twist it all the way around the pencil. So you have something that you can use at school, and every time you look at it, you can remember that God has a stellar plan to fix the problem that we made when we sinned.